Hello and welcome to Crossroads of Rockland History. I'm Clare Sheridan from the Historical Society of Rockland County. My guest today is Frank LoBuono, and we will be speaking about his documentary film entitled Nat Fein, A Talent for Living, the Man Behind an Iconic Photograph. This episode of Crossroads of Rockland History is being sponsored by the town of Ramapo, Supervisor Michael Specht, and the Ramapo Town Board. We are grateful for their support of this program and of the Historical Society of Rockland County. The Historical Society of Rockland County is a nonprofit educational institution and principal repository for original documents and artifacts relating to Rockland County. Our headquarters are a 4-acre site featuring a history museum and the 1832 Jacob Blauvelt House located at 20 Zucker Road in New City, New York. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places and a designated New York State Path Through History site. And part of our broad and challenging mission is to share the history of Rockland County with the public. The Society is a private, not-for-profit organization and not a county or state agency. We rely on the generosity of our members and supporters, people just like you. I hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution or becoming a member of the Historical Society of Rockland County. If you're interested in either of these options or to learn about volunteer opportunities or upcoming events, visit our website at rocklandhistory.org. Most people don't know Nat Fein's name, but they know his work. Fein, who lived in Tappan for many years, captured one of the most iconic images in American sports history: Babe Ruth's final appearance at Yankee Stadium, a photograph that earned Fein the 1949 Pulitzer Prize and became known as Babe Ruth Bows Out. Frank LoBuono's documentary, Nat Fein, A Talent for Living, the Man Behind an Iconic Photograph, tells the story of a self-made photojournalist working during the golden age of journalism, whose career at the New York Herald Tribune earned him more New York Press Photographers Association awards than any of his peers. Through interviews with leading experts from the Associated Press, Time Life, and journalism history, the documentary film explores Fein's lasting influence on generations of photographers. More than a photographer, Fein was a singer, an artist, and a person who brought joy to others, a man who truly had a talent for living. This documentary is his remarkable and largely untold story. At this time, I'd like to welcome Rockland County's Frank LoBuono. Frank is a journalist with more than 40 years of experience in the television news profession. He writes a column for Nyack News and Views and hosts a podcast called Being Frank on Hudson River Radio. Welcome to Crossroads of Rockland History, Frank LoBuono. Before we begin speaking about your documentary, just take a moment and tell our listeners about yourself.
I'm actually a Jersey boy, as they kind of say. I grew up in Fort Lee, New Jersey, went to Fort Lee High School and Rutgers. For work, I began working at a place called TKR Cable in West Nyack, New York, which is now Optimum. It was for studio work, so I moved up from Fort Lee a little over 40 years ago, maybe 41 or 42 years ago, and have lived the great majority of that time in Nyack. I kind of fell in love with it. I kind of remembered it as a kid. It was the country. My friends thought I was crazy moving up to upstate to Rockland County. And I would explain, guys, it's 22 miles, but it was such a different way of living. But I fell in love with Nyack, moved up here and kind of never left. And I started as a very entry-level position in the local cable company as a production assistant. And I did some sports casting. I was a high school and college football player. And way too long a story, but was trying to break into amateur announcing. And by a stroke of good fortune, had run into a former teammate who suggested that I volunteer at some of the local cable companies, maybe doing some sports casting. So you could use what you knew a little bit and some of the new skills that you're learning in broadcasting. So I started doing local high school football games for the local cable company, literally for nothing, volunteering, and then making all of $25 a game. Now,
Wow.
I'm not a kid at this point. I'm already in my 20s. I've already graduated college. The degree in, long story, biology and microbiology, which wasn't serving me well at the time. So I was kind of reinventing myself. And through that, I managed to create a pretty successful career. From what TKR Cable, I became a producer, then program manager, and I really kind of created the local programming department, which I promise will eventually become connected to our story, and produced programming like a magazine program called Eye on Rockland, where we featured people, places, happenings of note within our coverage area, i.e. Rockland County. So, I was doing that and getting pretty successful with it, and eventually left TKR Cable, started my own production company for a little while. And then, believe it or not, when 9/11 hit, I started working the next day, 9/12, for CBS News as a cameraman, as a videographer. So I spent 10 days at Ground Zero. It's very memorable, my very first assignment for CBS. And then I spent about 20 years at CBS News in New York, holding various positions, mostly as a photographer, technician, occasionally as a producer. I was freelance, so I would go where the work was available. And in classic, once you learn how these large media companies work, it's very difficult to be considered a staff employee. They designate a term called permalance. And I became a permalancer, which meant I worked virtually every day. And I traveled. I had a wonderful career. I spent 30 days in Rome when Pope Francis the First was elected. I did the royal wedding in London and spent a couple of weeks there. I've been to China and Italy on assignment, a bunch of different times. So I managed to cobble together a pretty good career, and I retired a few years back. I think it's going to be 4 years this year on the 4th of July, so I could usurp the fireworks to say that was in my honor of retiring, and it also helped me to remember at least the date when I retired. So that's kind of the skinny. I've had a really long and varied career. I really have.
How did this documentary about Nat Fein come about?
Well, I had met Nat. Again, I had mentioned the Eye on Rockland program, and it comes out in the documentary. That was my first exposure to Nat. And and this will also come out hopefully in the documentary, part of the key to his success is he had this really magnetic personality. He was just genuinely so friendly. He liked people. It was part of the key to his work. And we have a number of experts making comments to the effect that, photography is really a two-way street. You've got to trust one another. You trust your subject, but the subject also has to trust you. And Nat was very good at that. And once you met him, you realized he had that kind of personality. It's kind of a superpower to say, oh, Nat always, made me feel special. And then somebody would say, well, Nat made everybody feel special. So don't feel so special. That's kind of a superpower. But anyway, so we did, when I found out, not every day, and especially in a county as small as Rockland, do you have a Pulitzer Prize winner. And not only that, one of the great Pulitzer Prize winners, that photograph, which won the 1949 Pulitzer Prize for a photo he made in 1948 of Babe Ruth's retirement. It's very famous. The black and white image of Ruth leaning on his bat, looking out into Yankee Stadium, is considered absolutely iconic. And being a Yankee fan, I knew of it. So I said, he's a great subject for our show. So we did a 10, 12, 15-minute feature on him. So I was familiar with his work and I was familiar with him. And then at CBS, it's an interesting story. I was actually going for a producer's job at Sunday Morning, which is very famous for its feature type thing. Mm-hmm. And one of the vice presidents had suggested, you had seen my reel and said, your stuff is pretty good. I see you have some talent, but it's small. It's a local cable company kind of thing. Is there something that you could do that you could present that's a little bigger, a little bolder in terms of vision and product? And I thought about it and I said, perfect. I've already got some of the preliminary work done. And, maybe I can rely on that to create this documentary. So that was kind of the root of it. And Nat was still alive at the time. He has subsequently passed away a few years ago now. So I knew I could also have access to him to kind of bring it up to speed. And so that's what we did. I worked with my partner, Catherine, at the time, who did the editing, and I did all the producing and writing and shooting, and took kind of years to put together. And it's not a new documentary, actually. We actually debuted it at the Rockland Center for the Arts in 2011. And then through a series of different personal issues, etc., kind of like it can happen in life, got put on the back burner in the back shelf. And a couple of people were encouraging me to kind of revisit it. And one of them was Matt Sieg at Rivertown Films. And we discussed it. And we had gotten so far as I had sent it to PBS, and WNET and WLIW were both willing to broadcast it way back in, as I said, 2010, 2011. But it wasn't complete. There were some rights fees issues, etc., that needed to be resolved. And kind of right in the middle of that, I ran into some of these personal issues. As I said, it got put on the back burner, and it got kind of forgotten for a little while. And as I said, Matt said, if you really want to, it's perfect for the library, and it's really informative. And so why don't you dust it off? And that's what we did.
Did you make a lot of changes from the 2011 version to the one that we're seeing now?
Not really. Part of the issue is I can't broadcast it in a larger way because of the rights fees. Little local libraries, the organization's not going to hunt me down and say, stop. At worst, that's what they would say. And I'm not making, it cost me tons of money. I'm not making any money. It's not a commercial venture. It's an educational type thing, documentary, perfectly suited for PBS. Okay, but to get a broader audience to really do it, I would need to do that. And then a little bit of cleanup. Like, unfortunately, because so much time has passed, and we use some pretty powerful subjects: head of AP photography, head of Time Life photography, the last publisher of the New York Herald Tribune, which at the time were elderly folk, if you'll allow me. Many of them have passed, and I would like to acknowledge that. But the general message has never changed, because it's really about Nat. And the title is very descriptive. It's Nat Fein, A Talent for Living. And I lifted it from one of our experts' talks and says, Nat could do so many things. He was a world-class photographer, but you should hear him sing. He sang all the time, and he would walk into bars and restaurants, find the piano player, give him a couple of tunes, and they would start singing together. He was a wonderful cartoonist. And some of his cartoons still exist. And if he went to anywhere to these places and he found that a waitress had a young child, he always did some kind of cartoon for them. Some of them exist. So he could do all of these things. One of the women that we interviewed said, well, he just had this talent for living. And I said, that's the perfect way to describe it. And it really is.
As you said, he worked at the New York Herald Tribune. For most of his career, he worked for them. How did he get the job at the New York Herald Tribune?
It's a wonderful story that also, and then all of this comes out in the documentary, plug, when we can get it to a broader audience. In the 1930s, I believe, he started as a copy boy, okay, and he was making about $11 a week. But he was fascinated by the photographers. He was interested, and they made more money. I don't know, like another $5, whatever. It comes out clearly. I don't remember exactly now at this point, but it comes out clearly. And in classic Nat Fein fashion, after hours, he would break into the dark room to teach himself how to develop, because this was, in those days, you did it all. You got your assignment, you shot the photo, you brought it back, you developed the photos. It was all part of the job. So he knew if he was ever going to get to that point, he had to learn how to develop. So he would break in until he got caught. Okay. And he gets caught by a couple of photographers, and, it's a union gig and all this other stuff. And they're like, hey, kid, what are you doing in there? And they complained to the photo editor. Okay. And a couple of photographers were complaining, and it got kind of serious. But one or two guys said, hey, he's just a kid. How's he ever going to learn if he never gets a chance? So one of the other photographers could fabricate keys. Mm-hmm. So he fabricated a key for him. And he kept getting in until they finally gave up trying to keep him out. And from then, he learned how to do that. Now, the next big step was to get a camera. They didn't provide cameras. You had to own your own camera. And they used very famous, you see them in all the 30s, 40s films with the front bellows made by Graflex, speed graphic camera. And it was ridiculously expensive at the time, might have been $30 or $40, something in that nature. So his mother had a loan co-signed by two people to remortgage the house to buy him that camera. Hmm. And he used that camera and all of that to eventually work on staff at the New York Herald Tribune, and he became the only New York Herald Tribune photographer to win the Pulitzer.
His photographic style was quite artistic. Was that a stylistic choice for him, or did the New York Herald Tribune prefer images that have a more artistic style to them?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it comes out again from one of our experts. At the time that Nat was working, there were up to 14 daily newspapers in New York City. So it provided enormous competition. So it forced these guys into new ways of thinking. Hal Buell, the head of photography, and I have also Dr. Richard Wald from the Columbia School of Journalism says before this time, most journalistic photographs were flat depictions, people, place, time. That was it. Once these guys, and they created the golden age of photojournalism, came, wasn't good enough anymore because somebody would break the rules. Okay, and then, well, he's breaking the rules. I'm going to break his rules. And it just kept going over and over. It so established this wonderful sense of competition where everyone was trying to outdo everyone. And their editors would encourage them to do that. You know, with Nat Fein, his editor for most of his career was a fellow by the name of Dick Crandall. And people have to remember, Nat was a feature photographer. He could and did do hard news, but his general assignment was to do features. And Dick Crandall will say, Nat, get out there, man. Give me something different. And Nat took that to the nth degree. One great photo, and he would the captions are, okay, you ready? It's called Up from Down Under. There was something to do with Australia, and they brought a bunch of kangaroos. He borrows a kangaroo, unleashes it to jump out of the subway, and calls it Up from Down Under to advertise that Australia is up from down under to be in New York. That is Nat's way of thinking.
That's great. I read that Scott Petoniak of the Baseball Hall of Fame wrote, quote, one of the things that made Nat Fein among the most revered photojournalists of the 20th century was his ability to find perspectives his peers did not, unquote. I think you would agree with that statement.
Absolutely. And again, in the documentary, let's focus on the classic photo, okay? First of all, it's commonly known as the Babe Bows Out. Okay, for Babe Ruth, but it's not. It's number 3 bows out, okay, which is more important to how he made the photo. Another key word there, Matt never said he took a photo. He made a photo. He always said, I made this photo. Because he crafted every photo. Whether he had props to it, that's a whole other story, or not, he was always looking for the different angle because he made it. So in the newsreel footage that we use for Major League Baseball in the film, you can see all the photographers are lined up along the third or first base line to get a frontal shot of Ruth. And Nat's there. I do use a little spot shadow. He picks up his bag and he sneaks behind the other reporters so nobody can see him because he wants to do it on his own. And he gets behind Ruth and he has one frame left. Okay, because he's already used his others to do the standard, and we show the other. There's one with Ruth coming out of the dugout and he's doffing his cap. There's another one where Ruth is at his locker and he's buttoning up his jersey. They're standard. They're good shots. Crandall would use them, but here's where it comes in. That's intellect. I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to look for a little different angle. And he goes, and he's the only one. There was actually, believe it or not, one other photographer who shot a similar frame, but it's in color. It's not in black and white. It lacks the same pathos. That same, here's an ailing, older warrior saying one last goodbye. You need, the black and white captures that. Mm-hmm. So that's all part of Nat's was always looking for something different. And if he could help it along the way, and it's a quote in there, he once said, look, you could wait 100 years for something to happen. You can make it happen. And Nat made it happen.
Do you know who were Nat Fein's mentors or inspirations?
Well, you know what's so interesting about that, and it also comes out in the documentary through our experts. These guys were inventing it. Okay, him and other photographers
Mm-hmm.
would know the name Ouija, who was kind of at the same time, but kind of the anti-Nat. Ouija did dark photographs, crime scenes and stuff, where Nat did lighter things. But they taught themselves because everything was new. As I said, before this, there was nobody really to look at. Even, Matthew Brady, if you look at portraits of Lincoln and Grant, they're all cool for what they are, but they're just standard kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, these guys are inventing it. So they had no real mentors. They became the mentors.
We spoke about the fact that number 3 bows out. I wasn't aware that that was the formal title of that photo because we all know it as The Babe Bows Out. It earned him the Pulitzer Prize, as you said, and it is arguably the most famous sports photo of all time. So you sort of described it a little bit, but can you, just for listeners, I mean, for the maybe 1 or 2 people that don't know this photo, just talk a little bit more about the photo itself?
Well, again, Ruth had retired previously, but in Yankee tradition, they retire numbers of their great players so that no one else can wear them again. No one else could be them, so no one else could wear that number again. So at this day, number 3 is going to be retired. But one of the reasons Ruth retired, too, is he was ailing. He had cancer. And quite frankly, he was near death. He would die only a few months after that photo. And that all comes out in the overall story too, where the photographers tried not to press him too much because he looked tired, and they were aware of it. But there was, of course, a huge sellout crowd at Yankee Stadium, and you can see from the newsreels footage. As I said, there's 14 papers plus international, so there are dozens and dozens of photographers there. It was a very big moment in certainly New York history, but because baseball is the national pastime, it would have national implications. I mean, to this day, how many years later are we still talking about Babe Ruth?
Mm-hmm.
We still use the tomb for any enormous task as Ruthian. We use that to describe. So it still has that relevance. And again, as described in the film, it captures a fallen glory, if you will, but it doesn't tarnish the image of the man. It magnifies it. He's still powerful in his imagery, if not in body, in the image that he represents, captured by the photographer. It represents a bowed but undefeated warrior.
Yeah, great way to describe it. Many of Nat's other photographs were award-winning. I mean, he won a lot of awards for a lot of different photos. Talk a little bit more about that.
He won more New York Press local photographer award than anybody. And if you look, his volume of his work is just overwhelming. You couldn't see it all. You'd take hours just to see all of his work. And he chronicled the city, and that also comes out in the documentary. What he shot, and some of it just really doesn't even exist anymore. But and as he described, his passion was human nature. It was shown through photography, but his real inner zeitgeist, I guess is the right word, was human interest. So he was always looking, and he puts that, he says, I'm looking at the way people are moving, not just the way they look, from the way they dress, the way they're moving, the way they stand, the way they hold themselves. This whole thing is running through his mind and being processed instantly without being taught. He never took a photo lesson in his life. Ever. It just happened. And again, an interesting aside, but I think is important here. And we interview a new photographer from Arlington, Virginia, who specializes in using the old format cameras that they use, like the speed graphic. And enough said, his first line is he holds up the camera and he says, "This camera doesn't do auto anything." And then goes through the litany of things just to take a single frame. So these guys are extraordinarily skillful, and they taught themselves all of it. Now, I know, what? known as a decent photographer with Nat as my mentor. You'll see a lot of his work in my work. I use my cell phone.
Right.
Point, focus a little. I may play with it a little, and then after post, I may clean it up a little. But the comparison is there's none. None.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's not the unlimited amount of shots either. I mean, you have a finite group of
Absolutely.
opportunities to capture the
Yeah.
images that you want. Recently, your film was screened at the Nyack Library,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned that that was at the urging of Rivertown Films, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. Are there other screenings planned?
I was so encouraged by the screening. It must have been a crowd of about 50, and I streamed it locally, of course, as I could. And the response was many people asking for more. With that in mind, I should move forward on getting back on track with getting it in a way where more people can see it because they want to see it. Claire, in all honesty, it moved me so much because there were tears at a few points because he was that powerful and his message of, looking for the better side of things. It moved people. And as
Mm-hmm.
a documentary filmmaker, you can't ask for more than that. I mean, it moved me to think that whatever we had accomplished had gotten people to that interest to really want to see more. So,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we did do okay.
Yeah, I think so. If you do further screenings, how would our listeners find out about those?
I have a pretty good, strong media presence. I have a public Facebook page, Frank LoBuono, where just go and, I'm all over the place all of the time. I teach a broadcast journalism production course. And one of the things I tell my students is you've got to be your own best advocate. Claire, I'm sure you at your podcast, we don't promote ourselves. Not a lot of other people do.
Right.
So I would promote it. Absolutely. I would reach out to you that perhaps we could do more talking. I always love to talk about photojournalism, journalism in general. You can always count on me. So, yeah, I do my own podcast. I invite people on to try to keep local issues in the public eye. So I'll be out there. We'll let you know.
That's great. Excellent. Any final thoughts?
Just again, I want to thank the Nyack Library. They were wonderful to me. Fort Lee Film, all the people associated with that helped out a lot. The people that came out, Nyack is crazy. There was like 15 events that night, all of them important. So the fact that we even got about 50 people to come out on that is, and also the people who helped me make the film, Catherine, Ali, Lauren Korovec, who did the music, and all the people who contributed. We had some pretty highbrow, busy people who took the time out to talk with us and really give us really good stuff. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm usually on the other side of the microphone, so it's kind of fun to gab about myself for a change.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled to have been able to speak to you. Is there anybody working right now that you think is at the level that Nat was working in?
There's so much good work out there now, and again, because of these guys, they're always pushing the envelope. There's something about still photography. Capturing a single moment will
Mm-hmm.
always be special because they can change the world. From Nick Ut, the very hard but famous girl, or the Vietnam burning girl,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
changed the world. It helped to end the war.
Yeah, absolutely.
People, if stuff from Gaza, and if I just might, and that's what people have to be aware of. It's important, and I think you'll appreciate it with AI, artificial intelligence, and photographers. It's
Mm-hmm.
out there, and some of them, they make you feel emotion, and people say, "Well, that's what's most important." It's not. There are journalists that risk their lives every day to bring you real images, truthful images that cannot be substituted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive me
Mm-hmm.
on my soapbox, but
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's
and people
absolutely
have
important.
to realize that. And so with that in mind, people are making great photos. Don't fall for the AI. It has its place. It does, but don't fall for it. Know it for what it is, where
Mm-hmm.
it is, and know the difference that when somebody puts their life on the line to bring you a true image that will affect the world.
Well, that's a perfect way to end. Thank you so much, Frank
Thank you,
LoBuono, for
Claire.
being with me today on Crossroads. I really appreciate it.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
As we said earlier, you can follow Frank LoBuono on his Facebook page. There you'll find all of his upcoming programs, information about his podcast, so please check that out. Once again, we thank the town of Ramapo, Supervisor Michael Specht, and the Ramapo Town Board for sponsoring this episode of Crossroads of Rockland History. We are grateful for their support of this program and of the Historical Society of Rockland County. Keep in mind that all the information we discussed can be found at our website, rocklandhistory.org. I hope you'll tune in to the next episode of Crossroads of Rockland History on Monday, May 18th. The Historical Society of Rockland County now has a new and improved website. I hope you'll check it out and learn about all of the events and programs on tap. Our web address again is rocklandhistory.org. You can also call us at 845-634-9629. That's rocklandhistory.org or 634-9629. Another great way to keep up with us is to follow us on Facebook. We're also on Instagram and Threads. You can also read our blog on Tumblr. And we have a new feature in the Rockland County Times called Rockland Remembers, which I hope you will check out. 2026 marks 250 years since the founding of our country. The Historical Society has some great lectures, bus trips, and a new museum exhibit taking place, so please check our website for all the details. And don't forget that most of our broadcasts are archived at rocklandhistory.org as podcasts. You can also find archived episodes on all major podcast platforms. I'm Clare Sheridan, and thanks for listening to Crossroads of Rockland History.